I'm going to briefly introduce our respondents and ask them to come forward. And why don't we do it in this order? Imam Yahya Hendi is the Muslim chaplain at Georgetown University. He's also the Imam of the Islamic Society of Frederick, Maryland, and is the Muslim chaplain at the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda. He serves as a member. Is that old?
Yeah, that's it.
Well, wait a minute. No, Islamic Jurisprudence Council of North America. Wait a minute. I want to embarrass you. He's an adjunct faculty member and teaches. He holds a master's degree from Hartford and is working on a PhD in comparative religion, and was selected by Hartford Seminary, which has been very dedicated to interfaith relations for many years, to receive its annual James Gitemi Significant Ministry Award. So let's welcome Imam Hendi.
A lot of the stuff you just heard about me is not really right. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that, but it seems like internet is very deceptive, by the way. You know, you go to internet and there's all kind of data. And I don't mean to embarrass my friend, but anyway. Rabbi, my brother, and our Jewish sisters and brothers in the room, I wanted to tell you how broken my heart is, how sad I am, and devastated with the terrorist attack on the synagogue and its community. And I believe I speak for all Muslims across the country and the world. Muslims are very much aware of anti-Islam, Islamophobia, so we know exactly what it means to be hated for who you are and to be attacked for who you are. It's not an easy feeling. So may God protect our Jewish community and our communities from any form of hate, any form of bigotry, and any form of phobia. Amen. I was, thank God, not given a deadline for my commentary, and since I'm a clergy, I could take 3 hours. We are in Muslims and Jews love to do commentaries, and our commentaries could be 100 volumes long and have been on for 5,000 years and 1,400 years. So imagine what kind of commentary an imam would make on a rabbi. But also the rabbi stole most of my points because we, as he said, we have been traveling together, have done a lot of things together. I slept at his home. I cried with him in his home. I laughed with him in his home. I was on his nerves so many times. He was on my nerves so many times when we were working on the caravan of reconciliation, which is, by the way, it was 10 years after September 11. We thought that the country was broken. The country was still being shaped by hatred and division. We thought the best thing to do is to travel, Christians, Jews, and Muslims across the country, to say one ark, one humanity, one America. We can agree to disagree without being disagreeable. We can find ways to differ in a civil way. That the Ark of Noah once brought every kind of person, every kind of creature on it. Why cannot America celebrate each and every one of us on it? 11 states, 18 cities, 3,200 miles, exactly 2 weeks, started in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, all the way to Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta, into our largest event at a mega church of 5,000 Christians in Chattanooga, Tennessee. An amazing standing ovation for the three of us walking in, an evangelical minister, a rabbi, and an imam preaching from the pulpit, something the South has never seen like that. It was, I remember how we walked in and I could see still some angry faces. What are these guys doing here? To standing ovation, hugs and kisses and tears that transforms us, but also the people present, that we can make it together. So yes, we were on each other's nerves for good cause. We had to disagree. I grew up elsewhere, the rabbi grew up in the States. There are things I don't know about what to do in the crazy culture of Washington, D.C., to say the least, but also he has things to learn about how to be sensitive to the Muslim community as we organized that program. Naturally, we had to disagree, but we overcame these disagreements in so many ways. So as they say, the clash of ideas is the sound of freedom. I said the clash of disagreeing to put something together is the sound of success. Welcome back to Frederick, Maryland by the governor then, O'Malley, who called us the heroes of American pluralism. We were all in tears to be welcomed back, the governor. It taught us that the country was still split. I can't more now divided than before, unfortunately. But there is a room to grow, there's a room to listen, there is a room to work together. Something about Jerry, my brother, the rabbi. He is an amazing cook. Does not like to use internet Google Maps. I learned that he likes to carry the map actually and look at it and take notes and right and left and what exit. I like the phone maps, so we had to find common grounds there. The rabbi was one of very few rabbis who back in the 70s foresaw the need to work together, planted olive trees next to Palestinians, olive trees instead of those ones that were destroyed by the IDF. Believed that it was the duty of a rabbi to do that. I would say it's the duty of an imam and the duty of a priest and a pastor to stand up for others when others are hurt. We learned to look for Chinese food that offers kosher and halal Chinese after 12 midnight together in Kentucky and in Tennessee and in Pennsylvania, trust me, but we managed to do that. Clergy Beyond Borders, he told you a lot about it. I so many years of wondering who could be my partner. I put the idea together, went and registered it in the state of Maryland. Wanted someone whose heart is in this work. Heard that the rabbi was no longer a rabbi, if you remember, at the synagogue. So, oh my God, this is the partner. I called him up, we met for lunch, and he was the best partner to make Clergy Beyond Borders become what it has become with work and influence, not only in the United States of America, but overseas. I've done a lot of work overseas as well. If you notice, Rabbi J did not use the term Abrahamic religions, something we sort of vowed to do together, that we don't speak about Abrahamic religions because that tends to be giving power to men more than women. We like to say the religions of Sarah and Hagar. Jesus had Mary with him. There was something called Rebecca and Khadija and Aisha. It's good to ensure that women have an equal place at the table, and something our interreligious community could do together to ensure that we we join efforts to ensure that women are no longer irrelevant in our religious discussions. They're not only relevant, they are the partners on that road. One of the amazing stories, I don't know if you remember that story, Rabbi, when we were at the synagogue in Cleveland. I was asked to preach that Friday evening, and as I finished, an old lady walked in with her, very weak. We said she's sick, she's tired, she's exhausted, with tears in her eyes, and I said, "Are you okay? How's everything?" With tears, I said, "Did I hurt you? Did I say anything wrong?" She said, "No. Now I can die." I thought, I'm sorry if I hurt you. She said, "No, I'm happy. I'm 93 years. I have always wanted to see Christians and Muslims worshiping in my synagogue. And tonight I had the opportunity to see an Imam preaching in my synagogue. Now I can die in peace." I never forget that story. In tears, the rabbi and the others who were with us on the trip. And so, in a way, our interreligious work is not only done in classrooms and by the educated PhDs. It's also needed in the community, in the grassroots. There are people who want this, who want to see this. And I wish I had the time to talk about my own narrative of how that is the case. I disagree with the term interfaith relations. I like to call it, especially within the Christian, Jewish, Muslim perspective, I would like to call it interreligious, not interfaith. I think that interfaith may give the understanding that we are talking about three different faiths. I say it's one faith, three religions. Faith in one God, the God of us all, the God who brings us together. And how does that faith translate itself? And how it had translated itself over the course of time. That needs to be in dialogue. We, the people, need to be in dialogue. The faith does not need to be in dialogue with itself. It's already in dialogue with itself. And that's the challenge that I would like to bring to interreligious discussions. Is it interfaith or interreligious? How can we go beyond that? Also, how can we transform dialogue to diapractice? How can we go beyond talking about the ideas that bring us together or separate us from one another into coming together for the common good of our human community? We are all in this together. We are all in this together. The fight for social justice, environmental justice, political justice, healthcare justice cannot be won by Jews alone in the field, or Christians, or Muslims, or Hindus, or Buddhists, or Baha'is. It can only be won, using Jewish terminology, gam yachad, when we do it together. When we do it together as members of one family that cares. And therefore, we must challenge ourselves and our own perceptions as we do interreligious dialogue. How can we learn to cry together, but also find ways to smile together? How can we agree to disagree without being disagreeable on who God is and is not, whether there is or there is no life after death, whether Jesus is or is not God incarnate, whether Jesus is or is not coming back at the end of time, what is the concept of Messiah? How can we agree to disagree on those matters without becoming enemies? How can we deeply be completely, authentically, passionately engaging with our own narratives, but at the same time not become enemies? How can a rabbi be fully engaged with a Palestinian Muslim on how he thinks, and a Palestinian Muslim or a Christian be fully, authentically engaged with his own narrative without becoming enemies? For me, that's one of the challenges of interreligious dialogue. The rabbi spoke about radical hospitality. You reminded me of a hadith in the Muslim tradition where Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, said that when someone asked him, what is Islam? What is the principle of Islam? He said, تطعم الطعام وتقر السلام على من تعرف ومن لا تعرف. That number one, you feed, and number two, you greet them with peace. I could say, hi, I love you. It's not important. Before I love you, I have to live that I love you. How can I engage you with a meal, at lunch, at dinner? How can I be in your territory, standing up for you, sweating for you? Then when I say I love you, it has a meaning. So number one, with that radical hospitality that comes from in action, not in words. This book about pluralism, Rabbi used that verse that we use often together. There's another verse maybe you need to start using in chapter 30, where it says that one of the signs of God, if you want to know God well, you need to look at and celebrate اختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم, the diverse tongues you have and the diverse colors of skins you have. So having so many ethnicities and so many colors of skin, so many languages, so many religions is one of the signs of God. In other words, if I want to celebrate God, I have to celebrate God by caring for and protecting that diversity that we have. And we do that by ta'awanu, by working together, by tanafasu, competing with one another, and by ta'arafu, to know one another about the dignity of difference. The Quran says, وَلَا تَزَالُونَ مُخْتَلِفِينَ, that you will always be different. But that difference is not to bring you apart, but rather to believing that in unity lies our success. How can we go beyond tolerance into celebration? How can we not only tolerate one another, because I really hate that term, into celebrating one another? A story that just very brief, I'm about to finish. You made a mistake to give the microphone to an Imam, my friend. By the way, I was trained to preach by a Baptist minister. So blame the Baptists for my long time.
Baptist is next.
I don't know how the Baptist is going to be really Baptist today. Well, maybe I need to cut down. I teach a course at Georgetown University called Interreligious Encounter. And it is called the famous class offered by the theology department. What's unique in that class is that it's offered by the rabbi, the priest, and myself. And imagine having 3 instructors in the classroom together for 4 months every semester. Imagine what we go through. We agree, we disagree, we find ways to disagree in a civil, respectful way. We argue for and against, and we talk respectfully. And imagine what happens to our students who have come to us day after day, hour after hour, minute after minute. Thank you for what you have done. You have changed our lives. Imagine if we can offer a course like that at every university in America, where you have 3 practitioners of religion who are also scholars of religion who can teach together in the classroom. After all, I believe that you fear that which you do not know. The crazy nut, sorry for the language, who undermined our community and our country with the attack yesterday in Pittsburgh, obviously he does not know Judaism. The many attacks on Islam on daily basis on Fox News and others are because people don't know Islam. The attacks I hear by Muslims in some Muslim countries on Christianity, they have no clue what Christianity is. You know, I thank God to have given me the wisdom that for my master's degree, I decided to study Christianity. I went to a Christian seminary. And it did not make me become a Christian, but it made me become better Muslim, but also find ways to communicate and engage with my Christian neighbors. For my PhD work, I decided to focus on Judaism, learn Hebrew. And it made me become a better person. My friends, you fear that which you do not know. That's what we need to do. The last 2 points, very briefly, half a minute is, often people ask me when they realize that I do have an accent. They say, where are you from? I say I'm from Dust. Oh, Dust, where is that country? Is it in Africa or in Asia? I remind people of what the Quran and the Bible tell us, that we come from dust, to dust we shall be returned. So as the Washington Post called me, or named me, the Dustonian Imam. We are all fellow Dustonians. We are fellow brothers and sisters in dust. I mean that to say this should become our theology, this should become our politics, this should become our morality. At the end of the day, we are brothers and sisters in dust. There's nothing for me to show off, to make you feel you are less. There's nothing in you that makes you become better than I. We are all in this together. The Arabic word of Adam, from Adim al-Ard, it means dust. So when the Quran says that we come from Adam, some Muslim theologians believe that Adam here means dust, that we all come from Adam. We come from Adim, from the dust from which we come. My sisters and my brothers, we need to work together to make peace possible. For me, the way to peace is when we are able to live the attributes of God. God is as-Sami', the one who hears and listens. Can we listen to one another? God is al-Latif, the all-kind. Can we celebrate kindness with one another? God is al-Ghafur, the all-forgiving. How can we find ways to forgive one another and look forward? God is al-Wadud. God unconditionally loves. How can we find ways to unconditionally love? Thank you.
Thank you, Imam Hendi. I'd like to briefly introduce Dr. Matthew Taylor, who is a new scholar at the Institute for Islamic Christian Jewish Studies, also a member of the consortium in Baltimore. Taylor holds a PhD from Georgetown University. He does teaching in other schools in the region. If I remember correctly, Matt, your final dissertation was around eschatology?
Yep. Comparing evangelical Christians and Salafi Muslims in America.
Very well, okay, very good, thank you very much. So in the American scene. Matthew has done work with the Reformed Institute in young adult and youth engagement and teaching, and he holds 2 other degrees, including one from Fuller Theological Seminary. So let's welcome Matthew Taylor.
Just to clarify, Larry misspoke earlier. I'm not Baptist, I'm Presbyterian, and I assure you Presbyterians are far more boring. I'm honored to share this podium with such wonderful interfaith leaders and wise men. And I started this summer working at the Institute for Islamic Christian and Jewish Studies in Baltimore. Just to give you a little bit of the history of the ICJS, it was founded as the Institute for Christian and Jewish Studies in 1987 by a group of leaders in the Baltimore area, Jewish and Christian, who wanted to combat anti-Semitism in the Christian community. And many of the founders were business leaders, and thinking as businessmen, they said, let's start an institute. Well, it'll be a 2 or 3 year project, and then we'll have wiped out anti-Semitism in the greater Baltimore area, and we can move on to other things. And of course, the institute is still around. Anti-Semitism has not gone anywhere. But 5 years ago, the board and the leadership of the institute said, well, we've been working very hard on anti-Semitism for all these 25 years. Why aren't we combating Islamophobia as well? And so the Institute changed its name, kept the same acronym, but changed its name and added Islam as one of the component traditions. Excuse me. And decided we were also going to be combating Islamophobia in America. The image that I've had for the last 36 hours or so, thinking about the situation in America, especially through the lens of Pittsburgh, is that we live in a world that is, in a country that is coming apart at the seams. There's many of us, many people who've spent decades stitching those seams, building interreligious understanding, combating anti-Semitism, combating Islamophobia. And we need new legions of seam stitchers. That's part of what we do at the ICJS, is we're trying to train new groups in this. Our mission statement is, we build learning communities where interreligious difference can become a force for good. So to make a shameless plug for another event that you should all come to, one of the things we are working on right now and focusing on this fall is this question of anti-Semitism and where it came from, and also how that is interrelated and imbricated with the history of black slavery in America, and how there's a shared theological history. And Beverly Mitchell, who is a historical theologian at Wesley Seminary, just up the road here, has written a wonderful book called Plantations and Death Camps. We are hosting her on December 12th up in Baltimore to talk. And the title of her lecture is White Supremacy, Power, and the Role of Interfaith. And I would encourage you to grab a flyer on your way out. It's worth the trip up to Baltimore. I'd like to make two overarching points from my own background and experience that I think largely buttress and illustrate some of the things that Rabbi Serrata and Imam Hendi have described. My first point is that everyone enters this interreligious conversation from somewhere. And very few of us have any control over where we come from. Very few of us chose the circumstances of our birth. None of us, I would think. Very few of us chose even our original religious identity. We were inculcated and indoctrinated and raised in families. And this is part of that contingency that builds humility that we experience as we enter the interreligious world. I was raised as an evangelical Christian in Southern California. I went to evangelical private school. I went to Bible classes. I went to evangelical churches. And if I knew much about the participants of other religions in the world, they were described to me as, at worst, benighted people living in ignorance and idolatry and sin and in need of the gospel. And at best, they were objects for conversion and evangelization. I did a religious studies minor in college. I studied about the world religions. This was at a large state university. I read parts of the Quran. But I have to say I didn't know anything about Islam because I didn't know Muslims. There's a way that you can learn about a religious tradition and never learn it, never know it, because you're learning at a distance. And part of what I worry about in our world today is people who know just enough about Islam or just enough about Judaism or just enough about Christianity to be dangerous. Because knowledge without empathy, knowledge without relationship is a dangerous thing. So, right after I graduated from college, still very much in the mode of an evangelical, I was invited to go on a trip to Turkey. We called it an intercultural exchange. It was a mission trip. We were there to convert these Turkish college students that we were partnering with. We framed it as an intercultural exchange because in Turkey, even at that time in 2003, it was not politic to talk about doing missions and evangelism in Turkey. And I was partnered on this mission trip for 1 month living with a guy named Halit. Halit was a very kind, welcoming man. He was still in college. He was studying astronomy. He was a dancer. And we spent a month living together and talking together and being there with my agenda. I was trying to be as overt in my Christian piety as I possibly could. I made a great show of reading my Bible every day, even though I didn't do that in the U.S. I made sure to pray before every meal, though I often forgot that in the U.S. And Halit, he was willing to go along with us because he wanted to learn English. He was willing to go along with us because he was a nominal Muslim. He didn't really care that much about religion. And so he let me play act my profound faith, and he got what he could out of our time together. And so after a month of this, after a month of real conversation, but with an agenda on my side, Halit took me out to dinner. And we were talking over dinner, and Halit said, "You know, Matt, I really admire your faith." And I thought, I got him. And he said, "It makes me want to start going back to the mosque. I think I'm going to start going back to Jummah prayer. Because I feel like faith is lacking in my life." And this conversation precipitated for me a sort of existential theological crisis. It punctured a hole in my certainty, because suddenly I didn't know whether this was a good thing. I didn't know whether Halit going back to the mosque would draw him closer to my God or further from my God. And it popped the bubble that I was living with. And it was one catalytic event in a number of catalytic events that led me to become a scholar who studies Islam. This might be controversial, but I think it does little good for us to resent or disdain people and where they come from, theologically or religiously. It does little good to disdain people who exist within communities of certainty and even of interreligious resentment. Those people have been shaped by forces. They probably grew up in that mindset. And most of us, as I said, have no control over where we came from, but everyone learns in relationship and in encounter. So when I am leading people into interreligious encounter, I try to make the point that wherever you come from, and whatever door you came through, you're welcome here. You're welcome in the interreligious conversation. Because everyone enters from somewhere. You have to start somewhere. My second overarching point is what I guess I would call the other side of that Christer Stendahl idea of holy envy that Rabbi Serrata talked about so eloquently. In holy envy, we encounter something in another religious tradition that we deeply admire, that we almost desire to integrate into our own tradition, our own identity. What do we do with that experience? Because you can go through life in interreligious encounter and have a lot of these moments of holy envy and remain at a distance still, admiring at a distance, but not moving deeper into that experience. What does it mean to have the religious other become your pedagogical interlocutor, to become your teacher, to become a fellow traveler? As Larry mentioned, I did a master's degree at Fuller Seminary. This was years after my encounter with Halit. I was trying to take every class that I could on Islam, and I realized most of the people in my classes were trying to become missionaries to Muslims. And they wanted to study Islam because they wanted to gain better arguments. They wanted to gain better strategies for talking to Muslims. And I realized over the course of taking these classes that that's not what I want. But as I studied more and more about Islam, I was having experiences not only of holy envy, but of holy resonance. I was catching glimpses and catching echoes in the conversations that Muslims were having that sounded a lot like the conversations I was having internally, the questions I was grappling with, they were grappling with. And for me, Scripture was that entry point. Coming from my evangelical background, the Bible was suddenly problematized in all kinds of ways. As I studied it in modernity, as I studied it in conversation with historical critical scholarship. As I was listening to the periphery of some of these Muslim conversations around the Quran, around the Hadith, I started catching echoes of the questions that I was asking and started thinking, maybe I have something to learn from that conversation over there. Muslims were asking similar questions. Not that they had all the answers. They were grappling with similar things. Scripture is one of those funny things among our traditions because in each of our traditions we have distinct understandings of Scripture, but not unique understandings of Scripture. There's enough overlap we can have conversation together. So I found myself learning alongside Muslims, with none of us having definitive answers, but asking similar questions, gaining new frameworks, gaining new vocabularies for wrestling with my own questions. Just to give one more illustration of this, I have learned more in the last few years about the New Testament from non-Christian Jewish scholars who began studying the New Testament than I have from my fellow Christians. There are a number of Jewish scholars who come back to reading and commenting upon the New Testament, the Christian scriptures, treating it as, at least in part, a Jewish text from the first and early second century that was mostly written by Jews and was in conversation with all kinds of elements of Judaism around it. And that perspective that I've gained by looking at the Bible that way, through scholars like Amy Jo Levine, who've come to the text in new ways. And there's a new second edition that came out this year of the Jewish Annotated New Testament. It's my favorite study Bible now, because it gives perspectives that I never gained. It gives opportunities and options for reading this text that I never had. At some point, our monologues within our traditions become stale. We have talked around the same questions so many times, we've read the same text so many times that we start recycling the arguments. I found that having these outside perspectives, having these voices, clarion calls from outside, speaking into my tradition has
thrown the doors open,
given me fresh perspectives, galvanized me in new ways. We live in a world right now that where interreligious encounter and interreligious learning is essential. It's one of our hopes for holding the seams together in society. And I trust that with friends like these, we can move it forward. Inshallah.